welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Scocciolo. I'm a professor of administrative law at Universitat Rovira i Virgili, and together with Professor Susana Galera Rodrigo from Rey Juan Carlos University, we are the co-principal investigators of the project Regulation for Community-Based Energy System through Storage and Flexibility, Acceptability, Governance, and Digital Operation, a project that we call COMENERSYS. The COMENERSYS project is funded by the Spanish Ministry of Science and Innovation and the European Union. The project explores the community dimension of the energy transition, aiming to shift from a centralized fossil fuel-based model to a decentralized renewable-based system. This transition is part of a broader strategy to empower citizens and legitimize the ecological transition. At the heart of this shift are energy communities, new legal entities designed to enable local stakeholders to actively participate in energy systems. Energy communities contribute to the deployment of a decentralized and locally driven energy model, reinforcing community resilience and proximity-based energy governance. They play a key role in addressing current challenges such as energy poverty, supply security, and the efficient use of smart energy grids through digitalization, flexibility, and storage. Today's webinar is part of the work package 3 of the project, which focuses on the challenges posed by the digitalization of the energy system operations. This work package is led by Professor Estrella Gutierrez David from the Complutense University and Vanessa Jimenez Serranía from the University of Salamanca. The work package includes contributions from computer science, our colleagues from the computer science department, as Carles Angles Tafalla, who will be presenting today, and Christophe Dauden Esmel. The topic of this webinar directly addresses one of the core challenges identified in our project, the deployment and implementation of data-driven technologies in energy communities, particularly blockchain, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. Without further delay, I would like to thank all of today's speakers and everyone joining us. I now hand over to Vanessa and Estrella, who will introduce the webinar in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrews, and well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Navigating Data Governance and Privacy in Green Data Spaces Initiatives. As Andrews just said, today we will focus on one of the major challenges of the energy transition in Europe: how to manage and protect data in an increasingly digital and connected environment. During this hour, our experts will present innovative solutions and practical cases on techniques to protect privacy in household energy data using methods like time aggregation, how to balance the right to access energy with data protection and privacy, especially within the context of the new European regulations, and the role of smart contracts and blockchain technology in ensuring security and privacy in smart grids. We hope this session will be an opportunity to reflect, to ask questions, and share ideas about the future of data management in the energy sector. We encourage you to participate actively and benefit from the expertise of our speakers. So now Estrella has the floor.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, so thank you, Vanessa, for your presentation. Let's welcome our first speaker, who is Dr. Sasha van Schandel. Is it right, Sasha? The pronunciation
yes.
Of your surname. Thank you very much. And her presentation will be on time aggregation for reducing identifiability in household energy data. But let me say something about few lines of Professor Sasha van Schendel. She's assistant professor in data protection law and cybersecurity at the Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. She previously worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the Tilburg University on smart grids and collection of data in the energy sector. And Dr. Van Schendel will share with us the innovative techniques for protecting privacy in household energy data, especially focusing on time aggregation methods. So, Dr. Van Schendel, next 15 minutes, more or less, are yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, and also thank you all for taking the initiative to organize this webinar and having all of us here. I think the three presentations will complement each other very well. Let me just take a second to share my screen for the slides. And put them in full screen mode. Yes, so if all is well, you should be able to see my slides. If there's an issue, please let me know, but I see people nodding. So again, thank you for having me here. I would like to present a paper today that I wrote last year together with a colleague of mine who unfortunately could not be here this afternoon to co-present it with me, which is Ivo Varenhorst. He worked as a PhD candidate at the University of Twente, also in the Netherlands, during the time that we worked on this project, and he currently works at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. And we wrote this paper in the context of the Megamind project, which is a project about smart energy grids and the use of AI in the energy sector, which was funded by the Dutch government. So what we did is we did research on this topic of time aggregation, but why we wrote this paper is because we noticed in our project, which included a lot of stakeholders like network operators, local network operators, energy suppliers, consumer organizations, all kinds of actors present in the energy network, more specifically the electricity network. We noticed that a lot of them did not know much about privacy and data protection. So they knew something about the importance of data for the energy sector and for energy grids specifically. So they were aware that data was an important factor there and digitalization was an important factor, but they didn't know the specifics of the right to data protection and the right to privacy. In their mind, it was simply something that was used a lot of times to be used as an argument to prohibit data collection or to prohibit them from doing things that they wanted to do with the data, but they weren't sure how it worked exactly. So I've been a data protection lawyer for about 10 years now, and my co-author Ivo Varenhorst, he is an electrical engineer, so he has a technical background, not a lawyer at all. And we decided together that if you sit together from different disciplines, you will notice that you don't know a lot about the other disciplines. So we decided to write this multidisciplinary paper together. And what we ended up with was this paper specifically on time aggregation. I will explain why we chose time aggregation, but we saw there at least one of the ways that we could make use of data in a way to kind of further the energy transition while also protecting data and preserving the right to privacy. So to just give you a very brief overview of data in the energy sector, I think this is the part that most of you will all be familiar with. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. And I can also imagine that this will come back in the other two presentations. But just to say, of course, when we have data in the energy sector nowadays, we can do a lot with that. So you can use data to know the electricity demand that there will be at a certain time, also to predict it for the future for a certain time period. And at the same time also have knowledge on the offer available of electricity. And we especially see that with smart grids, that there is this kind of push to do this in an automated way, so that the energy grid will be able to kind of steer energy flows itself, to make sure that energy is distributed where it's supposed to be, also to make grid estimation and predictions to make sure that we don't overload the grid, for example. And that, at least in the Netherlands, but I also know in other countries, We have currently also a lot of problems with congestion on the energy grid. So we have a scarcity in distribution capacity because of renewable energy, because more and more devices are connected to the energy grid. And that is why it's even more crucial to be able to predict and see these energy flows also in real time. So energy data definitely plays an important role, specifically from the consumer side. So to be able to know what kind of energy demand there will be from energy consumers, and also even offer at some point, because now we have these energy prosumers that also insert energy themselves into the grid. So definitely an important role there for data. But at the same time, this comes with a lot of complexity. So on the one hand, you have this pressure to gather data. So this pressure comes from a societal level, you could say, to mitigate issues like congestion management, scarcity on the energy grid, to be able to allow for energy distribution on the local level, but also other topics such as allowing for energy justice. So to have more insight into the energy sector. So it's definitely a big push for digitalization to gather all of this data on a societal level, but also on a legal level. So we see in EU energy law and also in national energy law implementing a lot of these provisions. We see more and more a push to gather data, especially for network operators, for energy suppliers. And they have a lot of obligations who to share this data with and what kind of data they should be gathering for which kind of different purposes. And especially with energy transition, there are also specific data that need to be gathered in the context of renewable energy and decentralized energy flows that we have more and more as well. So on the one hand, this push to gather data, then on the other hand, also as the technology develops, especially with AI, we see this now, all these discussions on AI in the energy grid, that there's also this technological optimism that so much is possible with the data, and that more data is also readily available because we have these smart energy prosumers. So the consumers themselves are using more and more smart devices connected to the energy grid, which make data available to data suppliers, to energy suppliers, sorry, and to, of course, also the network operators. At the same time, there is from the technological side this optimism, but as I said before, we encountered in all our project with all the stakeholders in the energy sector, that there is also kind of this gap between different disciplines. So the electrical engineers are developing smart products for the energy grids, but they are not always talking to the data protection and privacy lawyers. At the same time, the data protection and privacy lawyers have all kinds of ideas of what could and could not be collected, should not be collected, under which conditions, but they also tend to stay a bit within their own bubble and not always talk to engineers about what is actually being developed. So this creates for some problematic gray areas and also for some legal uncertainty, you could say. And then at the same time, and I think one of the other presentations will touch upon that, so I don't want to say too much about it, but there can also be this tension between, on the one hand, fundamental rights like data protection and privacy, and on the other hand, also obligations under energy law. So you might have to comply with obligations there, but at the same time, you want to respect these fundamental rights. So what we saw was really a need for a multidisciplinary approach. And what we then did is we wrote this paper for a journal which focuses on technical audience. So we really wrote it for people that have that don't have a legal background, where we first aimed to at least explain the difference between data protection and privacy, because they're often mentioned at the same time, but they're not exactly the same right. So we tried to show in the paper that on the one hand, you have the right to privacy, which is very restrictive, meaning that you as an individual, as a consumer, as a household, you have the right to share data with whomever you want to share it with. And you also have the right to say, I don't want to share certain data with other people. So you have the right to say something about what goes on in your own home, behind your own meter, and with your own devices. So that kind of, we call it in privacy and data protection theories as a shield function. So it's kind of the shield function that privacy puts up there. And at the same time, we have the right to data protection, which is much more about under which conditions can you gather which data. So you can gather data that is about individuals, but what do you need to take into account when you do that? How do you do that? So it sets a lot of different conditions. And there seems to be this kind of myth, first of all, that a lot of people think, oh, well, we're not allowed to gather personal data, and I will explain what that is. within the energy sector because it's protected by data protection. Yes, there is data protection, but that doesn't mean that you can't gather any data about households at all. So it's more about the way in which you gather this. Just to say this very briefly, you could argue that, and I always use this picture to kind of explain it, that privacy is a lot broader than data protection. So privacy is also about a lot of things that have nothing to do with data or that have nothing to do with information. So it can also be about, for example, spatial privacy, like who do you allow into your own home, has nothing to do with data. But of course, in a lot of cases, there will be this overlap with data, for example, when discussing smart meters. So that has both a privacy component because it is about the question, what kind of information about your smart meter or your energy consumption and offer you want to share with others. And at the same time, it also has to do with data protection because it is often personal data. So when is data protection law relevant? What is this personal data that I mentioned now a couple of times? The key factor for data protection law to apply is this concept of identifiability, which means that if you have data in a data set, and within that data set, you can identify individuals, you can identify natural persons, then this data is personal data. Well, what does that mean? It means that either you can already pinpoint someone out, you can specifically say, well, looking at this energy data, this is the data about, for example, pertaining to me, the data for Dr. van Schendel, who lives in a certain area in the Netherlands. Or it could be that you don't know my specific identity yet, but you would be able to determine it on the basis of the data that you have. So it's quite a broad notion. A lot of examples of personal data are things like address data, telephone, email, these kind of basic data. But of course, also the unique number of a smart meter, which is connected to a specific household. And it can also even be a unique energy consumption profile. So if you would combine my energy usage data with other types of data, you would be able to very easily pinpoint specific patterns in that if you have enough access to other data. So even from my energy consumption profile, you would be able to determine that it's me, for example. Well, what does that mean? It means that the notion of personal data is quite broad. It's a very dynamic and open concept, meaning that the moment someone has possession over another data set that they previously didn't have, suddenly they might be in possession of personal data, because if you combine different data points, you might be able to pinpoint to a certain individual. And this might also change over time because you have access to better AI or access to better technical tools from which you can get information from the data. And then suddenly what you have, you thought was anonymous data, and now it is personal data. So a lot of the data, or I would say almost all of the data that relates to energy consumers will be personal data. So it's not so much a question of, oh, it's personal data, you should not collect the data. The question is, when are you allowed to collect it, and how do you handle it in a responsible way to comply with data protection law? So that is something that we really wanted to show in the paper that obviously I don't have time to go into detail here. But what we wanted to show indeed is that taking the case of an electric vehicle, a household where they have an electric vehicle, that you could make highly precise predictions about when a person gets home. So that with a lot of energy profiles, it easily turns into personal data. And then again, to connect it back to the discussion on privacy, privacy is very much about what you or would not want to share with others. So that's why we say certain information is private. But what you have to take into account is that a lot of energy data might not be deemed private by consumers, like they might not feel very private about it. Like they would be fine with sharing this data, but that doesn't mean that it's not personal data. So the right to data protection will still apply to that information. Well, what is the crux here? What is the crux of the story? The problem is that a lot of this data that is gathered in the energy sector will be indeed personal data, because it can become this data in the future if you combine it with other tools or other data, and that it's very hard to anonymize data, meaning that anonymized data is data where you cannot trace it back to an individual anymore. So there have been a lot of experiments in practice to try to anonymize data, not just in the energy sector, but in all societal sectors. And this seems to be almost impossible if you really want to anonymize it in the way that data protection law, namely the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, requires. So this is extremely difficult. So what we then focused on in the paper is, well, if anonymization is so difficult and it's so risky to try to do that because you run the risk that data is actually not as anonymous as you thought, it is better to reduce identifiability. So to make sure that on the one hand, it is not clear from data what specific habits are of people. So for example, you would not be able to see when someone arrives home and starts to charge their EV or turns on all kinds of devices, or what kind of habits they have when they are at home by looking at their energy consumption. So we kind of want to shield those habits, so comply with the right to privacy. Here you can think, for example, about the debates that we had on smart meters. I think in all European countries probably, where people were very hesitant of having smart meters in their house because they said, well, then suddenly everyone will be able to see when I arrive home, when I leave my house, what I do in my house. So these are all privacy-related arguments, where if you reduce identifiability and you make it less obvious which energy consumption happens when, then you can shield that a little bit. And at the same time, what we discussed extensively in the paper, and I don't have time to discuss it here, is that data protection law has something called a risk-based approach, where they really ask you to gather only the data that you need, also data minimization. So it's really about reducing this identifiability as much as you can, at least. So to take all kinds of protective measures over the data so that it doesn't show as much information as it would without taking these measures. And an important thing that we noticed in the research is that usually we have this 15-minute interval when data are gathered with smart meters, and that there have been a lot of research experiments already that show when you collect data for that time period of 15 meters, that is enough to extract all kinds of information about what goes on in a household. So what we concluded in our research, in the legal part of the research, is that there are a lot of privacy engineering methods out there. Think about differential privacies, maybe a term you would have heard sometime, but there's also all kinds of anonymity techniques from a technical perspective. A lot of these are being researched. They always have a trade-off, so it's always it seems to be always difficult to apply this, to say in a general way, this is how you should apply it if you want to be able to have useful effects from the data. So you want to be able to do grid estimation with it or other kinds of useful practices with the data while trying to maintain these kinds of anonymity or reducing identifiability. But one of the measures that is not so extensively researched yet is time aggregation. So really combining things on a higher level than a 15-minute interval to see where you can strike that balance between having useful data that you can actually use to stop congestion on the grid or to make estimations of energy flow, while at the same time also reducing identifiability enough that you cannot actually see habits of consumers. So that is what we focused on in our paper. So we first set out this legal discussion and the importance of it, and then in the technical part we described really how this would work. So I unfortunately cannot present this because I don't have the technical background. So my co-author Ivo would normally present this part, but I would highly encourage you to read this in the paper to see how he gathered the data, how he managed to see what will be the best interval. You can see here that he came up with an interval of 4 hours, for example, using data from 20 different households, also aggregating it over 20 different households. And the considerations that you need to take into account there. So all the different parameters that he collected to see what would be the best balanced sweet spot, if you will, to make use of the data while also protecting privacy. So in view of time, I don't know exactly how much time I have, but so what we concluded in the paper is indeed that instead of having this focus of, oh, is something personal data or is it not personal data, it is more safe to assume that data from households are personal data, because very often they will be. And that is indeed very important to take measures that minimize this identifiability, so that minimize seeing specific peaks or specific recognizable patterns in energy profiles of households, so that you can shield habits of people, shield energy consumption behaviors of people. So focus on the privacy protection, while at the same time also taking measures that you should be taking as an energy supplier or a network operator from a data protection perspective, where they have to minimize their data collection to the extent that the data can still be useful. So there's the balance they always have to try to achieve, and also minimize risk when data should leak, for example. So we saw that time aggregation could really bring something to the floor. There's given that time is such a key component within the energy sector, because we work with time intervals with smart meters, and that is something that is still quite underdeveloped in relation to other privacy engineering methods that are already out there. And that we definitely need this discussion to happen between data protection and privacy scholars and other legal scholars, also energy law scholars, and at the same time also the people with the technical expertise who are actually working in the energy sector to develop the AI and to develop all the data products, so that we make sure that we know what we are all talking about and can work together. Yeah, so that is it for my presentation. I hope I stayed relatively in time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sasha. You were in time, but anyway, we are very generous with time, at least in my case. So thank you for your insightful presentation. Now it's the turn to Dr. José Gabriel Luis Córdoba, who is going to share his presentation on the rights to energy, data protection, and privacy within the European Union energy transition. Let me say about Dr. José Gabriel Luis Córdoba that he has been an assistant professor at the Groningen Center of Energy Law and Sustainability, and he has participated in the Security, Technology and E-Privacy Research Group since 2024. He has been associate researcher at the Private and Economic Law Group in the Faculty of Law and Criminology at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels since 2018. And finally, Dr. Córdoba developed a joint PhD between the Vrije University and the La Universidad Central Marta Abreu de las Villas in Cuba, focusing on the right to energy. And Mr. José Gabriel will discuss now on the balance between the right to energy and the need for data protection and privacy during the European Union energy transition. So, Dr. Córdoba, please proceed. Thank you.
So thank you so much to you all for organizing this exciting experience, and it's very nice to see all our new faces in the webinar. So I will be presenting, as you perfectly said, some kind of analysis on the balancing, specifically the right to energy and the right to data protection and the right to privacy within the ongoing energy transition within the European Union. Can you see my slides? Perfect. So then essentially my presentation, as you already mentioned, is going to be dealing with this precise topic. Essentially, we are going to have 3 moments in the presentation. I am going to provide a brief introduction just for setting the framework. Then I will jump into the discussion aspect on the regulatory intentions and recommendations that were formulated within this paper that I just recently published. And then finally, we are going to see the last final remarks. So just for providing some kind of background, and this is something that is not completely developed within the paper because of the space constraints, but it's going to come up in a book at the end of this year. We are going to briefly present what we understand for the right to energy and how is this related to European law in the case of energy law, and then also how does that relate to the field of technology law. So essentially, by the right to energy, we link the right to energy directly to 4 main components that include this obligation that should include the content of the right to energy regarding energy availability, meaning by that sufficiency of supply to be able to meet the demands, energy accessibility regarding to the physical access to the grid to have the possibility to enjoy the benefits of the energy service that we are speaking about, Energy affordability in terms of the cost of that energy and the cost of meeting those energy needs that we already have, and how could those costs become a burden on the energy consumer side. And then energy reliability regarding, in the first place with continuity of supply, quality of supply in the second term, and also in terms of transparency, in terms of access to precise information in adequate time, and so on. Of course, this is still theoretical. If we see the European legal framework, we see that this right to energy is still a penumbra right. As you may know, perhaps, within the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, we all have the universal right to access service of general economic interest. This fundamental right, it's still underdeveloped, even it was completely acknowledged within the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights. It's still underdeveloped, so it was a moment in the European Union when we decided this is a priority, and eventually I think that phase out and vanish within the idea of promoting the protection of energy consumer rights. That is completely a different approach, but then this is something that not only academy, also civil society, and then still in terms of international agreements and regulations, it's being coming up into the debate. So then it's a very heated debate about whether we should explicitly recognize the right to energy and what implications that would have for the individuals, for the communities, and so on. But then, considering these four faculties that I developed within, or I described or substantiated within the context of the right to energy, we of course need to say, or we need to explain, what do we mean by energy? This was a common question that during 4 years were coming up on the table every time. Within this paper, specifically, when we refer to energy, we are just referring to electricity because of the scope of the regulation that we are going to be analyzing. We are defining energy as electricity per se, even though this is not the full extent definition of energy, or the full extent definition of energy that the right to energy should have. But keeping that into mind, of course, we jump to the second presentation. We are completely aware that from the public policy perspective, at the EU level, public policies try to achieve these so-called twin transitions that can be contrasted in the European Green Deal, when we are being advocated for developing the energy systems, which are expected to become smarter and more interconnected. Of course, this is an act of advocacy for digitalizing the energy sector, making able to making this energy system able to interact, to exchange information in an interoperable way, and so on. Of course, digital technology has a special role on this framework of discussion. This is something that is being completely advocated in the European Green Deal, and then also in the digital decade public policy. Of course, in the way that is being translated into regulation is still evolving, but we are going to be focusing only on the Recast Electricity Directive, and then also on the GDPR. That is what formulated in 2016, and how these two legal pieces of legal instruments are interrelating this topic of debate, but then also how do they interact between each other, if there are some overlapping, if there are points of tension. That's what we are going to be explaining and addressing today. So essentially, keeping that into mind, we are going to jump into the points of discussion. So then we need to consider that these two kind of parallel legal frameworks came on in a different time, responding to specific political decisions that were taken at the time in which they were enacted. But then still we cannot say that they are completely harmonized, that they are completely properly designed in a way that they can interact and conversate legally between one another. So then there are still some tensions that we are going to highlight from the paper analysis that we already conducted. So then we identify 5 points of tensions on which we develop some kind of specific policy recommendations. Then in the first time, as Sasha already described somehow, then one first point of tension is data minimization. In so many cases, the collection of energy data is being so massively developed and so granular that we are not even aware about the data that we are sharing and what purpose that data collection is having. And then, of course, we are exposing ourselves, and then we are sacrificing our privacy in front of this third party that is collecting this energy data. And therefore, there is research that has already proved that this exposition has provoked that these third parties are able to understand and they are able to determine our personal habits across the day and even in a specific moment of time. Of course, this is because of privacy infringements. Then a second point of tension comes towards informed consent. There is a wild, heated discussion about how valid is informed consent nowadays within the energy system. We see that every day in our daily life, we are seeing that users, they do not have the time on engaging these privacy disclosures. In so many cases, these privacy disclosures, they are not completely clear for the users, and I can say that from my own personal perspective. But then we need to argue and we need to analyze in the future research if informed consent should be considered as a lawful basis for data collection and processing. That is something that is being already discussed, and then we need to come up to perhaps a different way of justifying this data collection and data processing, because obviously we are all part and enjoying this digital energy system, but then we cannot say completely that we can withdraw our consent of getting our data being collected, because otherwise basically we are the energy provider, they are not able to provide this bill that we need to pay at the end of the month, and then we could be even excluded from the energy sector. So then to what extent can we formulate this informed consent in a proper way is still something that is being debated. Then also in terms of energy poverty, digital technologies are being presented as a way of monitoring this energy consumption, just to be able to tackle on time this spreading of these socioeconomic phenomena. But then, of course, this doesn't come alone, it also comes with consequences. And there are already some studies in the UK that they have been proven what is smart anxiety, how people are becoming anxious about the energy consumption. And this is also because they are continuously checking up this consumption across the day, and they are being more and more worried about the energy expenses at the end of the month. And of course, the real-time monitoring that we are all being put in under is also a matter of concern in terms of energy poverty. We are completely being exposed, as I already acknowledged, in the terms of providing granular data that it can be used for profiling and so on. And there are still some case law on this, and there is this personalized profile maker tool in which it was analyzed within case law. And then we can still see that there are some kind of infringements of data protection regulations. Of course, we are seeing this because we are advocating for a more and more digitalized energy developments. And then we are advocating for new tools to come into play, such as the case of AI, which is promising to have a very important role in addressing all the challenges that the energy system has, such as the grid congestion, and then being able to forecast demand and forecast energy generation to try to provide some kind of balance between energy demand and then energy generation. But then, of course, this new technology, they are also presenting challenges in terms of legal compliance by itself. All of this data, we can say artificial intelligence, we can also say blockchain, they depend on data. Data is becoming more and more a raw material that we need to use to develop these twin transitions. And because of that, we need to be worried about and we need to take action about data protection and the data protection infringement that can come out of it. And then to add to that already complex situation, and in terms of enforceability of legislation, we have that institutional competences are being overlapped within this framework. And in this situation, for instance, the national regulatory authorities and the national data protection authorities have some kind of overlapping that can bring some results into neither coming to take action in front of infringements, or they have some kind of different way of interpreting the law and making the law enforcement more uniform according to their own individual sphere of competence. So then in terms of recommendation, obviously, in terms of data minimization, we need concrete guidelines. There are no complete guidelines so far in regard towards which data is completely necessary to be collected to optimize the energy system. So then we need to win in terms of clarity, in terms of knowing what data need to be shared and that's the essential data that need to be shared, and how can that data be protected. In terms of informed consent, there are some scholars that are proposing opt-out mechanisms in which we are able to say which data or which non-essential data we are willingly going to share or not. But then we need to win in terms of transparency. We need to be more and more aware about the data that we are sharing and what purpose that data is being collected for. In terms of energy poverty, of course, we still are lacking some kind of a specific guidelines in terms of which data need to be processed. And even we are not even concerned other side effects of these twin transitions. In not all households, they can access to the proper technology means to be part of this precise twin transitions framework. We have so many households that they cannot profit from that digital development. So then this leverage of this digital divide is still exacerbating inequalities, and therefore can impact in the way that we can identify and mitigate this energy poverty. Of course, in terms of new digital technologies, there are other recommendations regarding the integration of data protection by design and by default as a core component of these digital energy systems. These new technologies that are coming up are presenting challenges, such is the case of AI, such is the case of blockchain, in which, because of its immutability, in the lack of possibility of modifying it, we cannot even, of course, execute the right of being forgotten, for instance. So then we need to find a way of implementing this data protection by design and by default as a core component, not only in the process of implementation, this new technology, also in the process of developing this new technology. And finally, because of this overlapping of competences, we need to create mechanisms of collaboration. These authorities that they are expected to enforce and expected to implement and to ensure the current implementation of these regulations need to be able to find a way of conversate, to have some kind of joint position towards this data protection infringement that can take place within the energy system. Of course, because of this, we cannot rely only in this ideal of moving forward towards these twin transitions, because they are going to solve all of problems. We need to be completely aware about all the challenges that come after it, and more research needs to be done towards that matter to be able to anticipate and be able to tackle those challenges on time. So then we need to be able to create this balancing between fundamental rights, because what is being very strongly manifested is that there are some fundamental rights that unfortunately are being more supported or more even acknowledged at the European level than others. Such is the case of the data protection, the right to data protection, the right to privacy, and when we see the right to energy, is still a penumbra right that no one, or almost no one, takes care about this. And then we need to create this balance about fundamental rights, because all of them supposedly they are satisfying fundamental needs. And then we need to be able to find a way of finding this regulatory reconciliation and the improvement of the rule of law, because at the end we need to make these twin transitions going forward or moving towards a joint position. So with that said, I would like to thank you for your time, and then I will be happy to reply to the question that you would have at the end of this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, Dr. Cordova. It was very insightful, really, and I have many doubts about some of the questions that you presented. So, well, but next we have the two last speakers that are Dr. Carles Angles Tafalla and Joan Ferrer-Queralt, who will elaborate on smart contracts for a secure and privacy-preserving smart grid. So we have the technical part now. But before they start the presentation, let me highlight some of the, briefly, some of the academic background of these two excellent scholars. First, Dr. Carles Angles Tafalla is a postdoctoral researcher of the Crisis Research Group at the Rovira i Virgili University of Tarragona. He received his PhD in computer science for the University of Rovira i Virgili in 2020. He has participated in several nationally funded research projects and authored several journals articles and conference contributions on the topic of smart cities. His research interests include data privacy, data security, and cryptographic protocols applied to smart cities and vehicular scenarios. Joan Ferrer-Queralt is a PhD student with the Crisis Research Group at the Universitat Rovira i Virgili in Tarragona. He completed his Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineer at the Universitat Rovira i Virgili in 2023, followed by a Master of Science in Computer Security Engineering and Artificial Intelligence in 2024, so that last year. He has recently started his brilliantly, by the way, his PhD studies focusing on privacy and security in smart grid environments. To date, Joan has presented at national and at international conferences, and he is the co-author of one GCR indexed journal article. His current research interests center on privacy-preserving cryptographic techniques and security architectures for next-generation energy systems. As I said before, Dr. Carles Angles Tafalla and Joan Ferrer-Queralt will explore the role of smart contracts and blockchain technology in creating secure and privacy-preserving smart grids. So you have the floor now for about 15 minutes. So let's start.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, Vanessa. Okay, I'm going to share my slides. So wait a moment. Okay. Okay. So assuming that everyone is seeing the slides properly. So let's start. First, I have to mention that at the beginning it was Tofu Dauden that should be here instead of Joan, but he's on a conference aboard, so Joan Ferrer is replacing him. I have to say that Joan Ferrer has more expertise in smart grids matters. I'm more specialized in smart cities. Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation. I'm starting with a little introduction. Okay, as many of you may know, nowadays the energy market is currently undergoing a major transformation. This is majorly caused because we are facing an increasing demand for energy and a really global push toward renewable sources. That has led to a more decentralized and locally generated energy solution. And of course, these changes on the grids, on the traditional grids, require a more flexible and intelligent infrastructure, which bring us to what we call smart grids. So basically, smart grids or smart grid is essentially an improved version of the traditional electric grid that began with the idea of implementing advanced metering infrastructure to improve efficiency and the management of energy resources. Unlike the traditional grids, smart grids feature what we call a two-way flow of information and data and energy, which enable the presence of what we call prosumers. Okay, prosumers are simply users that both consume energy and produce energy from the grid. These prosumers are the really main element of the smart grids, and their presence allow the implementation of a more decentralized and dynamic approaches. So that being said, our objectives in this sorry, excuse me a moment. Sorry about that. There was just a companion that entered the laboratory. So what I'm saying. So okay. That being said, about the smart grids, our main goal on this subject is to design a smart grid solution based on smart contracts to manage this new emerging energy model. And the solutions we proposed focus on three main aspects. First, the use of decentralized blockchain technology and smart contract logic, of course, for securing for secure and transparent energy operations. So we can ensure that the prosumers can benefit from the decentralized energy resources that smart grid offers. And of course, we also want to ensure the privacy of the users involved in the smart grid operation. Aside from these three main aspects I just mentioned, we also focused on collecting energy consumption and production data to fairly build the users of our smart grid. Use this consumption and production data to train machine learning models for load forecasting in order to anticipate the energy demand of the grid. And also, we want to help to balance the energy supply more effectively, reducing the risk of blackouts like the one we had here in Spain the last month. Okay. So here in this slide, we can see a general overview of our system. It basically consists on three layers: the prosumers layers, the smart grid layer, and the main grid layer. And here in the image of the right, we can see at the bottom the prosumers layer, when we have to point out the main actor, which are the prosumers, who we already said that are able to produce and consume electricity. And each prosumer is equipped with a smart meter that continuously monitors the energy that is consumed or produced into the grid. In our system, these smart meters are able to publish the prosumer's energy usage on the blockchain. That brings us to the second layer, which is the smart grid layer, where the smart contracts, the logic of the smart contracts, can manage can manage and publish the energy transactions of the prosumer. So in this layer, we have two kinds of smart contracts. We have the prosumer's smart contracts, which are in charge to manage all the transactions, or electricity transactions, between prosumers. And there's also a central or main smart contract that is in charge of the transaction that involve some interaction with the main grid. We also have to point out the figure of the coordinator that is in charge to verify that the prosumer's energy data that is published into the blockchain is valid and consistent with the readings of the energy usage. Finally, we have the main grid, which connects the smart grid. The smart grid layer we already mentioned, to the traditional energy infrastructures. Traditional energy infrastructures like power plants, renewable energy farms, and other centralized energy sources. So more or less, this is how our system process the prosumer's energy during each time interval. So in each time interval, the prosumers randomly divide the energy usage in pieces. Their energy usage, we mean energy production and energy consumption. So they divide this usage of energy and they publish these splitted values to the smart contracts using a method of the smart contract. So when this information is published into the smart contract, in fact, it can be published in as we can see in the image, can be published in several smart contracts in order to protect privacy, of course. The coordinator is the one in charge to verify that this publishing of energy in the blockchain is consistent and valid with the smart meter readings. The smart contracts then calculate whether there is an energy surplus or shortage and communicates this information to the mine smart contract. So the mine grid can be aware of these energy readings and react in real time as it considers and it can be considered. We have to mention that we have implemented this this proposal. In that matter, in order to evaluate this system, we create a simulated environment using Raspberry Pis that mimic the low computational capacity of real-world smart meters. And this setup allowed us to assess the performance of our proposal in terms of privacy protection, information loss, and computation overhead. Aside from this work proposal we just presented, currently we're working on what we call load forecasting, which consists on training models with the individual consumption, the prosumer's consumption data to better predict the energy demand. In that matter, we are developing a new protocol that incorporates blockchain-based reputation system, zero knowledge proof, as well as federated learning. And these measures seek to protect the user data from external attackers and protect the model against poisoning attacks. As the final slide, and our future work will focus on load balancing and demand response protocols. We aim to design a protocol that allows the grid to temporarily shut down certain elements from the electronic communities, like conditioned airs or vehicle chargers, to manage imbalance of the grid. So in that matter, the users will allow or permit which elements of their electric community can be turned off, okay? And depending on how many elements can be turned off or turned on, in order to manage imbalances of the grid, the smart grid will, or the prosumers will receive compensation for letting these elements help to balancing operations of the network. So that will be all of the work we have been making for this Common Energy Seas project, and we are happy to answer your questions.
So thank you very much to all of the speakers for your excellent presentations. And now it's the time for questions. So, well, there are a lot of questions in the air. For example, not only data aggregation, but there are another alternatives to protect data. How, for example, if consent is enough or not, and so on. But I have my first question for Sasha. So, Sasha, considering artificial intelligence and data protection legislation in the European Union, what do you think are the best strategies to protect data privacy of energy consumers or prosumers without hindering innovation in the energy transition?
Yes, thank you. I think that is indeed a question that definitely ties also some of the points of the presentations together. So I think what we see here, or at least what I see in my research, but what I also see in the other presentations here, is indeed that you have to strike this balance somehow. So on the one hand, indeed, you have this this push that you have to simply make use of AI in the energy grids to be able to perform these functions like grid estimation, to be able to prevent congestion, all of these aspects. So we definitely need AI, and we definitely need the gathering of data. But at the same time also to protect privacy and personal data. So I think what we see is now that the debate is maturing a lot, so that indeed we are seeing that a lot of this data is personal data, while before people were still debating, what is personal data, to what extent does it apply, etc. So we see here that it is clear that in almost all of these cases, it is personal data. And I think that on the one hand, you see more technical solutions, which would definitely help. So for example, in our presentation where you see time aggregation, but also here the solution proposed when you work with smart contracts, when you work with blockchain, with decentralized systems, other elements where you have distributed computing to protect some parts of the analytics going on and the output going on. So I think we definitely need a lot of technical solutions, and I think we've been stuck, at least I think we as lawyers, me as a lawyer, let's say, definitely stuck on looking at the legislation, looking how can we balance these different interests between digitalization that we need for the energy transition, and on the other hand, privacy and data protection, but we also need to kind of integrate technical solutions that debate and into the solutions that we are seeking as lawyers, and those will have to be tailor-made per situation. So every situation will require a different technical solution, different types of aggregation, or different types of privacy engineering. So I think you really need to assess that on a case-by-case basis, as is something that we are actually used to doing as lawyers, so that should help. So I think we definitely need to look towards having this engagement between lawyers and more technical expertise, so electrical engineering and computer science expertise.
So thank you very much, Sasha, for your contribution. Thank you very much.
I don't know if anyone has another question, or I have a lot of questions for the opponents, but I have I have a question for Professor Cordova because I was amazed by his presentation. And also regarding the question of energy poverty in the European Union and this balance between rights, that is also a point very important. I will like to ask you something regarding this question. I mean, should the right to energy be elevated to the status of a fundamental right under the EU law, like akin to data protection and privacy? What do you think?
Well, in that case, the answer from it will be always yes. If we don't have legally sounded and legally recognized rights, there is no way that we can claim it. In the way that we have it so far, we are kind of restricted to this notion as consumer, in which you can always claim your energy consumer rights recognized by legislation in front of your energy provider. But then that means that we are delinking the main responsibility of the state in front of the obligation of ensuring the realization of the right to energy. So then currently, if you have whatever problem you have, you always come to your energy provider, but then the state is completely excluded. That is because we have this notion of the energy consumer and the energy consumer rights prevailing in the European Union, and to some extent is not in line with existing EU regulation in terms of fundamental rights, in terms of the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, in which we all have this right to access services of general economic interest, and then the states are the main person obliged to guarantee this. So far, that can be argued currently in the energy scenario that we have. Because of what? Because we are energy consumers, and we can claim consumer rights in front of our providers. That's a limitation that we have, and we are having that because we don't have a legally recognized right to energy as a fundamental right. The European Union and also the member states mainly they have been focusing on strengthening this position because of the liberalization of the market and the energy market itself, and therefore this is the limitation that we have so far. So then it's easier to avoid someone doing something like avoid using my data for this and this purpose, or I don't want you to have my data because I want to keep it private. It's easier for us to do that ensuring some kind of socioeconomical obligation towards our citizens. That's, I think, that is one of the reasons why we don't have it so far, and one of the main reasons why we do need it so far.
Well,
sorry, Vanessa.
Yeah.
Vanessa. Can I say something very short?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
very
yes,
short.
of course.
Good to hear you, José Luis, because wow, in Spain, as you know, we have a precedent with the blackout.
Yeah.
the Iberian blackout. So it's good to know, good news. if there is a fundamental right to energy. Thank you. That's all my comment.
This is something regarding this question is kind of contradictory sometimes. We have the right to access the internet, but we don't have a recognition regarding the European Union level of a right to energy. So this is something that sometimes, when you have these rights recognized in the Constitution, or not in the Constitution, but in the fundamental rights that we have in the European Union, you have internet, you need an energy to access. So what's it? Well, it's kind of, yeah. But it was, we will see if we see the right to energy at the European Union level. But I have another question regarding the technical part, because as Professor Van Schendel said very well, it's very important to have these two parts, not only the legal part, but also the technical part. And is regarding Carles or Joan, whichever want to answer, have a doubt regarding your project. When you choose the blockchain that you use for this project, why did you choose this blockchain, and what do you have in consideration regarding this choice?
Okay, can you hear me? Hope so. Yeah. Okay, so regarding this choice, blockchain offers a series of advantages in respect to other solutions such as cloud or other solutions. That is, given the decentralized nature of a smart grid, it just makes sense to use a decentralized system such as the blockchain. And since the smart grid is such a critical infrastructure, you need like a system that is able to handle, for example, DDoS attacks, and the decentralization of the blockchain makes it so hard for attackers and other people to attack this system. And it also offers an immutable storage system. It's always available since its distributed nature, and all these advantages make it like the perfect choice for a smart grid. And well, the literature has lots of proposals about this. So well, hope that answers your question.
A little bit more. I just want to know a little bit more regarding that, because that there's a lot of different kinds of these blockchains. So if you have some, when you study this part, that is one of the main questions regarding what is the most suitable blockchain for this kind of projects, because you know that not all the blockchains are as decentralized as should be. So in your opinion, what are the best ones, or in which one with which ones you work during your project or your research?
It's not easy to answer this question because there are lots of blockchains and distributed ledgers, and each of those offers a series of advantages and disadvantages. In our case, what we do recommend is a public blockchain, since it can be more reliable. And for our tests and our implementation, with the one we used, it's not exactly a blockchain, but it's still a distributed ledger that works more or less the same, which is called IOTA, which is a distributed ledger specialized in IoT devices. And since smart grid is like a network of smart meters, which are in fact IoT devices, we thought that this was the one that could make more sense, and it's specially designed so IoT devices can handle the computation. And also it's feeless, so in our smart contract that has lots of transactions, it's cheaper too.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer. I don't know if somebody else has a question, a comment.
Yeah, if we would have time, I would like to ask to Juan something, if you don't mind, because something that the literature is pointing out from a legal perspective about and against blockchain, it's that a blockchain, even if it's a question of security, it's immutable, and therefore, I, as the right holder of the right to data protection, I have the right under EU law to be forgotten, to get my information be modified. So then how can we balance this? Are there some kind of technical solution for making some kind of, not amendments, but some kind of withdrawing information or modifying information or correcting information within that is being explored so far, that it can help us out on this right to be forgotten? Is that something that you have read about or that you have been looking at, or that you, yeah?
Well, I know this requirement, and at least in our case, in our proposal, since what we do is to divide randomly the electricity production or consumption, the values on the blockchain don't mean anything and don't suppose any privacy leakage for someone that sees it from the outside. And the only private value in that case is the link between those between all the consumption and production of the users. So in this case, since that link is not in the blockchain, it's something that only the user possesses, or the electrical company in this case. If the user wanted to remove those personal data to see, because it's their right, then what they can do is just delete the link of those accounts in each of the smart contracts, and the data would be and would not have any useful information.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have time maybe for, can I ask a question, or?
Of course.
Yeah, sorry,
of course,
the raise
Sasha.
hand function
No,
is
no,
not
it's okay.
working for me.
In the contrary, please.
No, I had a question for Jorge and Luis, because what you were talking about when we talking about consent. So we always talk about the issues with consent. We talk about it in the energy sector, but also in other sectors, that it's very difficult to have this informed consent, and often people feel like they have no option to say no or not to consent, or perhaps energy suppliers are relying on consent and then the consent is withdrawn. But I was wondering if you're looking into this in your research, or if it's out of scope of your research, is if you look at it from a perspective of other legal grounds that you could have to collect data, whether there is maybe more and more a trend towards having legal obligations for controllers, who in this case can be the network operators or the energy suppliers. So if from the EU level, like the recast electricity directive, but also other pieces of legislation, if they put obligations there for suppliers or for network operators to gather or share certain data, would that not be an obligation imposed on them to do so? And can they then, let's say, use that as a legal basis to process personal data instead of consent? So would that become maybe a more prominent legal basis? Like, is that maybe an idea that you share, or do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, regarding that, Sasha, that's something that I'm very thinking about on doing now. And I think that we need to reconsider, because normally when we when someone is just jumping into the field of data protection, normally everyone thinks that everything is about informed consent. And unfortunately, within GDPR, that's not the only lawful basis for having this. Of course, there are some kind of public interest, and of course, there are discussions over public interest. There are also about the functioning contracts, and then and so on. So then we need to reconsider which kind of lawful basis we need to use within this domain. Because I think that so far the informed consent is not sufficient to justify this data collection and data processing in general. There is this paper from 2020 from Kaisa Hütter, and then she already made some kind of preliminary analysis on that. But I think that we need to continue with that debate already, because obviously you are not going to be self-excluded from the energy system because you don't want to share your data. Your data needs to be shared. Otherwise, you cannot even benefit from the energy sector. You cannot receive your bill and so on. So then we need to see what other alternatives are more viable to have it as a lawful basis for data collection and data processing. That's something that I'm very thinking of. And then if you want to think a lot, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
So, sorry, Vanessa, I have a last question, very, very short, for Luis again. You mentioned opt-out mechanisms for non-essential data, okay? Mm-hmm. But on the one hand, opt-out mechanisms are highly problematic, very problematic. It's like a negative consent. In cookies regulation, we have seen that is a second door, a back door to obtain consent very in a lawful way. And on the other hand, if you're talking about non-essential data, maybe it may contradict the principle of minimization. in data protection. So if you can't make a short comment about it, and I promise not to ask anything else.
No. Thank you so much for your question. And indeed, we need to be aware about the challenges of every decision that we make at the policy level and then also at the regulatory level. Of course, we know that these opt-out procedures, they haven't proved to be sufficiently efficient in addressing these challenges. And so currently, if I click, of course, on refuse all of my cookies, there are even some studies that already prove that by saying that, I am accepting the cookie. So that's something that's very contradictory. So then, of course, we need to find a way of finding a solution on this. And then for that, we need to identify the risk. That's something that we need to take a closer look at. But then not having the possibility of deciding which information we want to share, if that information is not essential. And of course, I leave this concept open. I don't define this. I don't analyze it in the paper. This is something that needs to be addressed legally and then also from the policy making. But then we need to be able to decide what do we need to share or what we shouldn't share. That's something that we as subjects of the right to data protection, we should have. Because in so many cases, the information is being shared even without us knowing what are we sharing, and that's not fair. That's a completely lack of transparency. From my precise case, I have never signed any kind of privacy disclaimer with my energy provider, so I don't know what am I sharing. I do want to know what I am sharing. That's something that we need to take a closer look at that. And if I may link to Sasha, I was recently checking to Vattenfall, and Vattenfall allowed me to get some kind of assessment of my energy consumption on daily basis, weekly basis, and then monthly. What I have so far is monthly, but are you aware if data is still being collected during that period of time, or if it's only collected at this collection moment that I assume that it is? That's something I have not explored. I don't know if you have heard something about empirical research on this, but I would be completely intrigued about that.
I don't have empirical research on it, but talking to these people within the Megamind project, I suspect that they gather more than the moment that they are supposed to. Yeah, okay. That they say we're only gathering at this interval, but I have no way to prove it. Let's say I can't. Yeah, it's difficult to research that with them, but I have the suspicion from the things that they say in consortium meetings that they are not as respectful as they should be.
Okay, good to know.
Perfect. I don't know if somebody else has another question, or we can just wrap it up. Okay. Well, I'm glad for the question of Estrella that I have the same when I was, listening to the opt-out mechanism. It's always complicated to improve. Well, thank you very much to all our speakers for their very insightful presentations, and to everyone on the audience. And well, we just going to finish this event. Estrella, you have. If you want to say some words.
A few closing remarks. Although we are out of time, like in the Ramones song, if you are a fan of Ramones, they have a wonderful song, which is Out of Time. Well, so today's discussion have highlighted the critical importance of data governance, schemes and privacy in shaping and sustainable and secure energy future for Europe. We have explored innovative privacy techniques like time aggregation. Sasha, I hope you will go on with these privacy techniques, maybe federated learning, maybe, for example, synthetic data, or, for example, introducing noise. For example, there are other techniques that they request more research on the side of data lawyers, in combination with the technical teams. Okay, and we have then we have examined the delicate balance between the right to energy and data protection under the evolving European law regulations. And finally, we have delved into the transformative potential of smart contracts and blockchain for building secure and privacy-preserving smart grids. Vanessa, please.
It is clear that we have a very interesting future ahead, and we need the collaboration between legal, technical, and policy experts that is going to be essential to navigate the challenges and opportunities that we have ahead. We hope that today's session has sparked new ideas and provide practical insights that you can take back for your own work. And well, on behalf of the organization, I don't know if Andrews or Susanna want to say anything else, but on behalf of the organizing team, we thank you very much, all of you, for being here with us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.